Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My voice is audible. Can anyone confirm?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I request all the participants to mute their audio and video to avoid any kind of problem during the deliberation. Welcome to the 15th day of our program. Today is the last day. Uh, Today's topic is panel data analysis. We are fortunate that today we have with us Professor Badri Narayan Ratha. Professor Ratha is working as a professor of economics in the Department of Liberal Arts at Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, India. He is also currently serving as the associate editor in 4 peer-reviewed international journals, such as Emerging Markets, Finance and Trade, Taylor Francis, Journal of Economics and Administrative Sciences, Emerland, Humanities and Social Sciences Communication, Nature Group of Publication, SN Business and Economics, Springer, and worked as a guest editor for Economic Modeling elsewhere and Methodex elsewhere. He is the treasurer of Asia Pacific Applied Economic Association from June 2017 onwards. Prior to joining IIT Hyderabad, he was fellow at Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, New Delhi, and an economist at National Council of Applied Economic Research, New Delhi. He had worked as a research associate with the Department of Economics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, United States. He was also the recipient of a PhD intern at the United Nations World Institute of Development Economic Research, Finland, in 2006. His area of research expertise is in applied economics, economic growth, industrial economics, international trade, energy economics, and econometrics. He has published around 75 papers on these areas, including in journals such as Energy Economics, Renewable and Sustainable Energy Reviews, Energy Policy, Economic Modeling, Empirical Economics, Emerging Markets Review, Applied Economics, International Economics, Applied Economics Letters, and the International Trade Journals. Professor Ratha has obtained his MA and MPhil in economics from University of Hyderabad, India, and PhD in the economics from ISEC Bangalore, India. I welcoming you, sir, to this program. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and giving us the opportunity to listen to you. Now, I would like to request sir to take over the session. Please, sir.
yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, first of all, I would like to thank Professor Baroda Prasanna Mahapatra for giving me an opportunity to deliver a lecture for this advanced research methodology, I think, workshop. And at the same time, I would like to also express my sincere thanks to the ASBM University Bhubaneswar for giving me this opportunity. And thanks again, Dr. Baroda, for your nice introduction about myself. Now, coming to today's lecture, as Dr. Baroda already mentioned, so the title of my lecture is going to be panel data analysis. Particularly, I am going to focus mostly on the what you call the introductory panel data model, because panel data itself is so vast, and given the time 2 hours, which is really very much limited as well as the constraint to for me to actually do the entire what you call the panel data model analysis within those stipulated time. So now what I am going to do, I am actually going to divide those 2 hours into three sort of sessions. The first one, of course, is going to be a theory where I am going to highlight about what is the panel data analysis. Maybe I'm going to take around 1 hour, 15 minutes to, let's say, 1 hour, 1.5 hours. Then what I'm going to do, the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you a demo about how are you going to do a basic panel data analysis using the starter software. So which is typically, actually, I am comfortable. Of course, there are many econometric software where you all can use to do the analysis, but I am going to give you the demo using the starter econometric software. And the final maybe 10 minutes or 15 to 10 minutes, I'm going to again keep for the Q&A sessions. If you have any questions or doubt, anything related to my lectures, you are always free to ask me, and I'll try my best to answer your queries. Okay, now let us begin the lecture today, which is essentially all about the panel data model. But I am guessing that you are already well versed about the econometrics, and particularly you all know typically when we look about any set of econometrics, and when we focus mostly on the applied econometrics, so you will encounter there are three types of data. One is, of course, the time series data, which again you all know when you try to look about a particular series over the years or over any sort of periods, is in the chronological order, we know it's a time series data. Then there is, excuse me, the second type of data, which is again cross-section data. You all know the data at a particular point of time, whether you are going to look about, let's say, household survey, or you are thinking about, looking about economic growth of, let's say, 200 countries in the world in 2020. Those sort of data, when we try to collect at a particular point of time, that is all, cross-section data. But then the third type of data in the econometrics, in particularly in applied economics, as well as in the business, finance, and forecast, all other areas also, we try to look about combining both the time series data and cross-section data. When we try to combine both the time series data as well as the cross-section data, those data are known as the pooled data model. And in the pool, there are two types of pooling. One is pooling over the time. That means we can again combine both your time series data as well as the cross-section data by keeping the pool over the time. That means, let's say I give the example, I am interested to, let's say, work on determinants of economic growth, because I mostly work on economic growth. That's why I picked that example. If my objective is to, examine the determinants of economic growth for, let's say, developing countries in the world, and then I am trying to do this by using a pool data model. Essentially, when I said pool, what is that pool? Essentially, we do have, let's say, there are 100 developing countries in the world. And then I am interested to examine this objective by taking data from, let's say, 1980 onwards. So I have 1980, 1981, 82, so on and so forth, till, let's say, 2020, 2020. That means we have essentially 41 years data. My T became 41, and my N, that's the number of countries, that became 100, okay? And in that scenario, I'm going to pool those two things, because one is the time series, the other one is the cross-section. Then I pool that, and when I try to pool, I can pool over the time. That means what I'm going to do, I am going to take first 200 countries, then pool all those first 200 countries in the first year, that is 1980. Then again, I'm going to take all the 200 countries for those data, whatever the data, as I said, the determinants of GDP, economic growth means typically we are going to look at the per capita income. You can think about the saving, investment, export, imports, all those trade openness, for example, exchange rate. Those are the variables are going to be in my model. But before that, I need to arrange those data in pooling way. And that's what I'm saying. When I pool that over the time, that means I'm pooling one by one per period for those 200 countries. Then second type of pooling, also I can pool across the entity. That means I can redo the same exercise by pooling those cross-section entity. That means my first year 1980s, I can pool all the first 200 countries, and second year again I'm going to pool for all the 200 countries, and third year again I'm going to pool for all the 200 countries. In the first case, as I said, we can have, let's say, in first countries all the years. That means, let's say my first country is India. That means I'm keeping the India's data from 1980 to 2200 to 2020. That is essentially I did the pooling. Then second countries, third countries, fourth countries for all the 40 years. fifth countries, and let's say 100 countries. So those are typically the pool data. And of course, when I said about the panel data, is a typical way of looking about the, I would say, subset of the pooling. So pooling data, though we are trying to look like which is very much synonymous with the panel data, but there are some difference between the pool and the panel, and particularly in the pool data, your n and the dimension might change. Sometimes some of the year n should be 98, some of the year it could be 97 in my example, and t could be also some of the years we are just going to have, let's say, particular countries we do have the data for just 10 years, another country we do have the data for, let's say, 30 years, the third country data for, let's say, 39 years, or maybe even if we have still we are going to keep all those countries, but essentially the pooling is typically not necessarily going to have your n and t in the similar fashion. And that's why the panel is typically a way of trying to look at the data and arrange the data which is going to be balanced vis-a-vis unbalanced panel. So within the panel data, we are going to have a balanced panel data. When I said balanced panel, that typically refers to that a particular country is going to, what you call that country is essentially we are going to replicate that countries for over the periods, and at the same time the time series also is going to be replicated over the periods. That means whatever my n and t, let's say the example which I was giving, if we are having 100 countries and 40 years data, then when I said balanced country, balanced panel data implies that all the countries have the data of all 40 years. That's essentially the balance. So that means the same 100 countries are going to be repeated in the first year, again second year, and third year, and fourth year till 40th year. In the sense from 1980 to 2020, I don't really change my data set. That means my number of countries are going to fix, and those countries are going to be repeated in nature. It's not that first year I have taken 100, second year I'm taking 100, but I'm changing from India and now replacing with, so for example, Pakistan. That's not going to be possible. If that is happening, then that's not the balanced panel. Balanced panel, as I said, the n is going to be repeated over the t, and the t again is going to be always fixed. And both the way, if we have all the data, whatever your y and x1, x2, and x4, then if that is the case, then we said it's a balanced panel. Unbalanced panel is typically, again, the data set where we are going to miss some of the observations. Let's say we have 100 countries and 40 years data, but in between, there are some countries data are missing. And if that is happening, then we can say this is known as unbalanced panel. Why should we use panel data? Because you might, as a researcher, you are interested to know what is the advantages, or why we are so much curious and at least interested to use the panel data. And if you look at the advantages of the panel data, the first one is, of course, the controlling for individual heterogeneity. So when I said individual heterogeneity, that means we are looking about a data set where the individual time invariant models, particularly if you look at a variables that are same for a given cross-sectional unit over time, but vary across individuals. And if you look at, for example, you think about a data where you are focusing on cross-section data, and if you are focusing on the cross-section, you are not really going to get the flavor of time dimension, because it's just one point of time. Similarly, if you are focusing a time series data, of course, then you cannot really get the flavor of cross-section dimension. So that's why the advantage is here, when you try to run a panel data model, we can easily control the individual heterogeneity. And this sort of individual heterogeneity do vary. There are three types of heterogeneity. The first one is individual time invariant. That means some of those individual countries, whatever the variables, are going to remain same for that country, but it is going to vary between the country. Okay, so that's what we are trying to say. And I have given the example. For example, if you look at the farm management and farm's ability to, let's say, perform performance in terms of, let's say, Tobin's Q, or in terms of profitability, or returns on asset, or returns on equity, or whatever you think, or let's say thinking about market capitalizations, when you look about this ability to develop, and similarly the gender, all those aspects are going to be always remain same over the periods for a particular farm. But it is definitely going to change between the farms. One farm, whatever the ability, the farm A ability is not going to be exactly same with the farm B, and farm B's ability is not going to be exactly equal to the farm C ability. So that's why when we look at, we are saying time is going to be invariant, but the cross section are going to be vary. Second type of advantages, which is again the heterogeneity we are going to capture, is all about the period individual invariant, and particularly in the reverse way, where you have the variables that are same for all cross section unit, but that do varies from one period to other period. And you can think about prices, interest rate, closing price of stock indices, and treasury bills rate. You can think those are typically going to be what you call it. It's maybe some way we can say it's not necessarily going to vary between those, what you call the time series, cross section, but it is going to be definitely vary over the period of time. And the third one is, of course, when both are actually varying, it's like time varying model when you do have both the individual as well as the time, so variable that vary across cross-sectional units as well as over time. So typically, if you look at the farm's profit, a particular farm's profit is going to vary from first year to second year to third year. And similarly, farm's profit also is going to vary from first farm to second farm to let's say third to let's say 1,000 farms. If there are 1,000 farms, you all know that those 1,000 farms profit are going to vary between the farms. It's again going to vary within the farm over the periods. And similarly, I have given the other examples where sales, net worth, and capital stock etc. Now look about the examples. When I said examples of panel data, of course there are many examples, but I just picked one of the simple example where let us think about a scenario where we are interested to examine the cigarette demand across Indian state for last 20 years. So we do have, there is a region state we are 20 states, we have suppose taken major 20 states of our country, and then we are also taking 20 years, or maybe we are taking all the states as well as union territories of the countries, as well as the time period is let's say 2000 to 2020. And in those scenarios, what happens? We can look about the light consumption, incomes, and price. So if you are thinking about examining what is going to be the cigarette demand for this, our Indian states, then we are looking about the own price, and you can think about the average income of the consumers based on our microeconomics, and of course the light consumption of the individual. If how much he is consuming yesterday is also going to matter today, because already we know that whether he or she is addicted to cigarette consumption, and that's why we are keeping as a lag consumption as a variable. And this sort of data where you cannot really run or at least solve these questions by running a time series model. Similarly, you can't also resolve the issue by running a cross-section model, because if you try to run, you are of course going to run 20 times, because you can run for, let's say, first time you are running from Odisha, second time you run another states, third again for, let's say, Telangana, so on and so forth. And if you are running that, that's again going to be some issue. That's what I said, the heterogeneity we are unable to capture. The individual heterogeneity is going to vary, and these variables vary within the states and time. However, there are some variables which might be state invariant as well as time invariant, but affect the cigarette demand. Though we are saying there are core variables, which is the light consumption, income, and prices, which can actually affect the cigarette demand. But then apart from those, as I said, there could be some other variables which are state-specific control variables or state-specific characteristics, and it could be also time-specific characteristics, and which we treat those are, let's say, GI and WI and WT. GI, I refers number of cross-sectional unit, and in this scenario, if we have 30 states, I say I going to vary from 1 to 30, and T is going to vary from 1 to 20, because I have already written 20 years. So those variables are going to be captured in the model, which we are unable to capture those when you do a cross-section regression or you do any sort of time series regression. And GI refers to educations and religious. You can think those are control variables. Some way you can think education matters. If a person is more highly educated, then we are expecting there is a high likelihood that the person may not actually consume cigarette because he or she is already aware about the, what you call the harm or health effect on the consumption of cigarette. That's why education as well as the religious, some of the religious, they believe that it's not good to, consume cigarette or alcohol or those sort of things. And then WT is again going to vary from advertisement expenditure on the TV, creating awareness or radio or Twitter in any sort of social media. If that is happening, then it's going to vary from 1 year to other years also. And then we want to capture those, then we can easily do that by running a panel data model rather than cross-section or time series. And there are plethora of examples. In fact, I have personally used these. These are some of the examples which I picked, but you can keep adding and you can, depending upon your objective, you can easily use the panel data. But I will try to pick some of the examples. For example, if we are interested to know about determinants of ICT development in case of emerging market, I picked that example because I am going to show you about the data and how we are going to estimate using the Stata software, and that's why I picked that example here. So when I look about the determinants of ICT development, that means we are looking about, you all know that the the information communication technology, information communication technology, ICT development in the developing countries are keep increasing over the years. Okay, and then I am interested to look at what are those factors that actually helping, to determining this sort of ICT development. In the case of emerging market economy, EME stands for emerging market economy. There are 27 countries, and we have, let's say, another 20 years data. Then I can easily run that, through the panel data model. And there are again other examples which I have highlighted, and I also published papers by taking these as the research objectives. Okay, now let me start talking about the advantages. Though I said the major reason for us to go for what we call the panel data model is to looking about how to capture the individual country specific or individual state specific or individual farm specific heterogeneity, and of course how we are going to capture the time series dimension, the time varying nature when there is a structural changes, when there is a pandemic, when there is a global financial crisis, when there is a implementation of GST, and all those things when it's happened, then also it's going to have the time is going to vary, and then we need to capture all those things. You are not just capturing only the time cross section, but you have many cross section data, and you have over the time, and you are looking about those heterogeneity, and those heterogeneity we cannot really capture when you run the what you call cross section model or when you run a specific time series model, but you can really easily actually capture those by using the panel data. So apart from this, individual as well as the time dimension heterogeneity in nature, what else? What are the other advantages? That's what I'm trying to say here. The first one, it gives researcher a large number of data points, because earlier you are either focusing on N or you are either focusing on T. Let's say some of us who are working mostly in the, let's say, microeconomics or development economics related, then you try to mostly focus on what you call the cross-sectional data. That means you are doing a household survey, or you are focusing about, in India at least, I know there are many other audience from other countries, but there are what you call World Bank enterprise surveys, or you can think about NSSO in India, National Sample Survey Organization. They come up with different expenditure surveys and all. That means there are 1,000, or maybe 1 million household, and you are doing that data. But the household survey has been conducted either in 2015, which is a cross section 1 point, or it could be, let's say, surveyed in 2017 or 1980 or whatever year. So then in that scenario, when you do that, and of course then there is another sort of what we call the examples, which is the time series. If I am interested to know what is the impact of stock returns on the COVID, what is the impact of COVID-19 on the Indian stock market, then I can easily look about a time series model. I'll take the data from 1st January 2020 because that is the time, or maybe in India it was the 30th January 2020 with the first COVID case announced. From that time to till today, or let's say till yesterday, I can take the data and I can look at, I can do the model, and then this is going to be a time series model. But the advantages in the panel, as I said, you are either focusing in the cross section, you just have a n, but in the time series, you just have a t. Now in the panel, we do have n into t, n multiplied by t. That's the number of observations. And you all know from your basic econometrics knowledge, higher the number of observations, as it increases, moves towards infinity, then the degree of freedom is going to be much better, and the results which you are going to obtain is going to be more robust. And that's why it is one of the major advantages in the panel data. Second is reducing the collinearity among the explanatory variables. I don't have to discuss more detail because of the time constraint, but you all know that when you are trying to run any sort of model, particularly when you are dealing with small n or even small number of t, then you might end up with having a multi-collinearity issue in your right-hand side variables. The explanatory variables are very much going to be collinear in nature. And in those scenarios, if you are having a n into t dimension, then what happens, there have been empirical studies as well as the proof that the collinearity is really going to reduce because you are no more just focusing either a particular country or a particular n, but rather your n is already varying and your t is also varying. Because of those two things, it actually reduces the collinearity problem within the model. And third, in case of panel data, there is bound to have a heterogeneity in the entities, which I have already said, and that's actually panel data take those account, take heterogeneity into account while running the model is try to see how best to capture those heterogeneity. The other advantages are it minimizes the bias, so more efficiency. If you can look about in terms of the bias which are due to the cross-section regression or the bias due to the time series models, those bias are going to be some extent minimized when we are actually using the panel data models. And with cross-section data, there is no particular reason to differentiate between the omitted variables that are fixed over time or omitted variables that are actually changing, because as I already said, when you have a cross-section, that means you are only dealing with at one point. And therefore, there is no question of looking about what are the variables you are actually excluding and how you are going to look about those changes which are happening. For example, the structural reforms and all other exogenous shocks or endogenous shocks. When those shocks are actually going to you are unable to capture, while running this cross-sectional data, but it can be easily captured through the panel data model. Okay, now next I'm going to talk about a family of panel data model. That's why when I was started with my lecture, I said, given the time 2 hours, it is not easy for completing everything because this is panel data is actually so fast, and the use of this panel data model, I would say, is actually becoming more popular, at least from last 15 to 20 years. And now there have been also advanced panel data has really come off. And because of that, the family of the panel data is keep extending. And I am not going to discuss more detail, but my objective here is to just showcase, just to bring you at least to your kind attention that what are the things someone can do in the panel data. Of course, I am going to today lecture, I'm going to focus about the first two, which is the static panel data model. And I will also talk about the dynamic panel model. But then I'm not going to say anything about the remaining because, as I said, it really looks almost one semester, to capture or at least teach in details. But you do have, apart from the statics and dynamic panel, we do have the dynamic heterogeneous model. But let me at least again say a few seconds about each. The first one, when I said static panel data model, that means it's the typically we are looking about a crude way of the pooled data models, and then we are going to look about the fixed effect model and random effect model. I think some of you already whoever you are already familiar, if you are already familiar in the panel data, you all know the fixed defect and random effect model, and those are known as the static data model, static panel model. Then we do have a dynamic panel data model. So particularly in the dynamic panel data model, what happens, your dependent variables or essentially the lag dependent variable is going to be inbuilt in their model in the right hand side. And when we are injecting the right hand side in the lag dependent variable, you are injecting in your right hand side model as a explanatory variable, then that sort of panel become a panel dynamic panel, because there is a dynamic effect and lag effect, and those are very much dynamic in nature, and that's why we are saying it's a dynamic panel data. And again, today I am going to talk about two types of dynamic panel data model. One is, of course, the panel GMM, the panel generalized methods of movement phase difference model, and I'm going to talk about the panel system GMM, which is again belongs to dynamic panel data model. But having said this static as well as the dynamic, there are again over, as I said, over last 10 years to even 20 years, there have been many seminal works by different, what you call econometricians throughout the world. They have come up with almost, they have, invested their whole lifetime by doing the research on econometric theory, and then they develop that what are the problems in the dynamic model, what are the problems in the static model, and because of that, they started coming with one is, of course, dynamic heterogeneous panel, particularly when you have a slope variance and you are going to have each cross sections. And let's say the example which I was giving earlier in the beginning, determinants of economic growth. And as I said, in the determinants of economic growth, if I have 50 countries, then let's say I am only looking about two variables. So let's say saving and investment. You all know, higher the saving, higher is going to be the per capita income, or let's say the country's GDP, therefore the economic growth. And higher investment, always your investment, whether it's the FDI or FII or gross fixed capital formation of the country. When we look about those are typically the investment, those investment are always going to, again, increase the GDP. But what I'm saying, when we try to look the model, dynamic heterogeneous panels try to capture the heterogeneity and try to capture also how much is going to be the saving impact of, let's say, China's GDP, how much is going to be the impact of saving on India's GDP, how much, let's say, the impact of saving on the Brazil or Russia or big countries. Then I don't have really only one beta. Now I am going to have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, and beta 4, because beta 1 refers to China, beta 2 refers to India, for example, beta 3 Brazil, and beta 4 Russia. And when I do this dynamic panel and static model, I only take that beta as a group. In a group, we say, okay, group of countries, that's how much the saving is affecting the investment, sorry, the growth. But I cannot further look about this, and when that sort of dynamic heterogeneity is going to be there, that means there is a slope heterogeneity is already present. Then if we are unable to capture the slope heterogeneity, then what is going to happen? The results which you are going to obtain, that beta hat and the standard error of those beta hats are going to be biased. And sometimes even if they are going to be unbiased and efficient, but they're not going to be consistency. And I think you all know there are properties of OLS, ordinary least square, because these are again typically the regression analysis. And one of the properties is the consistency. You have the linearity, then the unbiasedness. Third one is efficiency, as well as the fourth one is the consistency. So what I'm trying to say, this sort of seminal works, they try to look about the properties and what is the changes. And based on those changes, they have developed these different models, and that's what the dynamic heterogeneous model actually is mostly by the Pesaron. He has come up with the mean group estimator and pooled mean group estimator to tackle those issues and to bring back the results which we are actually obtaining, is how best going to be unbiased and how best those are going to be what you call robust rather than going to be spurious in nature. Then there are some issues with regarding to the panel simultaneous equation model. There could be a simultaneous bias, there could be an endogenous issue, there could be a cross-sectional dependence issue. Those issues were actually not some extent going to be captured by your static and dynamic panel. That's why we can easily look about if there is a simultaneous equation, the way typically we look about the two-stage least square, three-stage least square, or even the seemingly unrelated regression, the Sur model and all are again going to be we can do, but only we are going to do through the penal framework. That's why it's named as penal simultaneous equation models. And discrete data models, typically when your dependent variables are going to be binary in nature or is going to be order in nature, you can think about logit, probit, or in the multinomial logit, order probit, and those sort of truncated regressions. When those are typically qualitative nature, your dependent variable is qualitative nature, but you have a penal data model. That means then you need to actually use the penal discrete data models and time varying stochastic frontier models through penal data. There are particularly who are actually working the production economics or the industrial organizations and the farm behavior and all. You can look about using this sort of time varying stochastic frontier, because you expect the farms, given the resources, given their inputs, they can only produce at the maximum to reach the frontier. That's why we are saying is the frontier is already given your resources, given the technology, farm cannot really go beyond that frontier. And then we try to capture that, whether they're really doing well or not, and trying to, if whatever the objective you have as industrial economics as well as the production economics, then we can use this time varying stochastic frontier model. And then we do have the all the time series dimension, which we try to address in a typical time series data model. But now we can same thing we can do in a penal data model. That means you have a penal data, you have n and t, but you are going to look at the stationary property. If you are looking about the stationary property, we can use the penal unit root test. If you are looking about penal cointegration, again you can look about the long run relationship between, let's say, two variables, but those two variables are not just a time series, rather this is a penal data. Therefore we have to do the penal cointegration. And penal Granger causality, if you are interested to examine whether x causes y or y causes x, or whether there is a unidirectional causality or bidirectional causality, so that again in the penal framework we can again use the penal Granger causality. And penal VAR model, penal vector heteroregressive, error correction models. There are many other, as I said, models have been evolved over last 10 to 20 years, and that's why the penal data models are more what you call familiar and more popular because of two reasons. One is, as I already said, the advantages. You already know what are the advantages of the penal data model over the cross section and time series. That's why researchers are more curious to use the penal data model. And second advantage is, being a researcher in economics, at least I can say that if you are really looking about any sort of international, what you call the quality top rated journals, or even any sort of peer reviewed good Scopus or Web of Science Index journal, you need to have a multi-country analysis. In the sense, if you just focus a study like on Nigeria, or a study on India or Pakistan or Australia, for example, then those sort of study may not really going to sell out in terms of your publication in the international peer-reviewed journal, because they always look at what is the lessons, that even if you find some study for India, but how that Indian study is going to helpful for Indonesia, and how that research is going to be important for the United States or China. So that's why to look at those sort of issues, you need to think about the issues which are not just a closed economy, rather than thinking about some from open economy perspectives. When I said open economy, it could be again within a state also. You can think about the different regional levels or the district levels, or you can think about different cross-country analysis. And because of that, that is also this sort of penal models are actually becoming more popular. Okay, now let me discuss the static model. So far I have tried my best to define what do you mean by penal data model, and I gave certain examples. Then I also said the advantages of penal data. Then I of course just briefly highlighted about what are the families, different types of penal models, which one can actually look into. Now I am going to talk about the static penal data model, which is typically the beginning. We are going to discuss the general penal data, which is known as the fixed defect and random effect, which I'm going to discuss soon. Now, if you look at the static panel data model, we are having certain possible combination of those panel data. The first one is going to be slope coefficients are constant and intercepts are vary over individual only. That's why we say YIT. If I write YIT is going to be alpha I star plus sum of your K varies from 1 to K, beta K, XKIT and UIT. That means Y is a simply dependent variable. Forget about what exactly there. Y could be GDP, it could be stock price, it could be whatever. It's up to you. And then we do have a dependent variable. We have a X independent variable, but then there are kth independent variable. That means X1, X2. Let's say I have three variables. Then I said Xk. So K varies from 1 to 3 here. And then beta K again varies from 1 to 3 because you will get beta 1 X1, beta 2 X2, and beta 3 X3. And I stand for number of countries. Let's say the example, I am sticking to that example, the determinants of economic growth. That's why I said I stand for number of countries. And T, of course, stands for the time period, which is the annual data, or even if you have quarterly data, you can take that way. And then the alpha, which is essentially you can look about the intercept term, and this alpha is what we are trying to say. Slope coefficients are constant. You can see I am not actually varying the slopes. I am keeping the slope remain constant, though I said beta 1 x1, but that beta is same for India, and beta is going to be same for second country, third country, and 50 country, because I am not really calculating 50 betas. I am only calculating only one beta. Let's say my K is just 1. That means I have just one dependent variable, and we have only one independent variable. Then in this scenario, the sum of your K varies 1 to K is going to be disappear. Then I can simply write YIT is equal to alpha I star plus beta 1 x1 IT plus UIT. That means the beta 1 which I have taken, this is just one beta, and I am not varying. That's why if you look at the top, I have written slope coefficient are constant, but intercept varies. That's why I have added the asterisk mark in your intercept term, alpha I star. That means the alpha I is going to vary. That means there is a variation between one country to other countries. That's the individual variations. And then, of course, we have the white noise, which is the error term. Similarly, the second scenario is the slope coefficients are constant, but intercept varies over individuals and time. And then if you look at the second term, I'm saying the individuals are going to vary, but that's going to vary not just between the countries, it is going to vary within the country over the times. That's why if you look at the difference between equation 1 and equation 2, particularly you look at the intercept. In the equation 1, I have written alpha I star. Here I have written alpha I t star. That means when I add the t, I'm saying I is going to vary from one country to other countries, and t is also now going to vary from one country to other countries. Of course, naturally going to vary, but t is also going to vary from one country, within the country, from one period to other period. That means it's going to be, let's say, alpha 1t. Then you can have alpha 1 1. That's what we can say. Alpha 1 2, alpha 2 2, alpha 2 3. That's why you can say if we have 20 years data, then I can write alpha 1 1, alpha 1 2, alpha 1 3, alpha 1 20. Then I'm going to again write alpha 2 1, because 2 means the country starts. I starts from I to 1 to 2. Then I will again repeat same thing. Alpha 2 1, alpha 2 2, alpha 2 3, alpha 2 20. Then I'll go to alpha 3 1, 3 2, 3 20, so on and so forth. I can go iterate that process to 50 times. 50 countries are there, that's why 50 times. And within the countries, over the periods varies, and between the countries also it varies. That's why I said slope coefficients are going to be constant. That means my explanatory variable remain constant, but essentially the intercept are going to vary. And the third type of models, which is typically all coefficients are vary over the individuals, where you can see both the coefficients, both are your alpha as well as the betas are going to vary. Now, all coefficients vary over only individual. Only individual is going to vary. That means you are going to not having any sort of t. T is going to completely disappear. Only it is going to vary between those individuals. But we are going to say time invariant model for the country. And fourth, all coefficients varies both time as well as the individuals. Okay, but if you look at the simplest way, when irrespective of the nature of models, but typically when you look about any sort of, what you call the basic panel data books, the textbook as well as the articles also, you will see this is the way we write yi is equal to, let's say, sum of your j varies from 1 to k, beta j, xj, that means there are a j number of explanatory variables, and now we have mu I, then delta t and EIT. So this model is going to be very, very important. So this mu I is nothing but your fixed specific effect, and that's typically going to be the individual entity or the cross-section entity, okay? And delta t is essentially your time dimension, the time series entity, and EIT is, of course, as usual, your white noise. So where I have already said this meta mu I is going to be from rho varies from, let's say, 1 to s, there is going to be gamma rho and j p rho I, known as unobserved effects, represents the joint impact of the GPI on yi. That implies that you have a individual country specific characteristics, and these individual country specific characteristics are going to have a joint impact on your yi. And this sort of joint impact implies that there is a heterogeneity in your model, and these heterogeneities are different from one country to other countries. However, those heterogeneities are within a country is not varying from 1 year to other year. But sometimes you are going to have the joint impact, and you're looking about how this joint heterogeneity impact on your y. Y is essentially the dependent variable. So in those scenarios, what happens if your mu I is correlated with your explanatory variable? That means if your individual country specific effect, why I'm saying country specific, I'm keep on saying country because I have already taken the example by looking about the determinants of economic growth in the developing country. That's why I'm sticking to that country. But as I said, you can relate to any other individual entity, but time being, let us stick to that country. So when I said this mu I is closely, that means the country specific, individual country specific effects are really going to be correlated with your explanatory variable, then the regression estimation from y on x variables will be subject to unobserved heterogeneity bias. So if you are running a panel data model, whether you run a simple OLS or whether you are running a fixed or random or any advanced level panel data model, as long as your mu I, which is the individual country specific effect, if these individual country specific effects are correlated with your x, then we are going to have, it is going to lead to heterogeneity bias. So if second, even if your mu I are not correlated, the second scenario, which I'm again explaining, and what I'm trying to say, the second scenario, you are assuming there is no correlation, okay, between your mu and the x, but it is presence will also generally cause the OLS to yield inefficient estimation and invalid standard error. So if it is related, still it is going to be a heterogeneity bias. If they are unrelated also, not correlated, still the OLS is going to be inefficient. That means you are going to obtain a high standard error, which is going to some extent not going to produce or yield the robust result. So how then we are going to tackle, how to overcome these problems before running any sort of models? So to do that, the fixed effect estimators used with either the distinct intercept term or error component models, assuming that your expected value of your xjit, which is the explanatory variables, and mu I not equal to 0. That's what we said. If that is the first scenario, the basic idea then to estimate a separate intercept for each individual. If we are going to able to run a separate intercept for each individual country, then probably we are going to not face the problem of both heterogeneity bias as well as what I talked about, the OLS inefficiency aspect too, okay? So how we are going to do this? Then how to estimate a separate intercept for each individual? There are three ways we can do through the fixed defect model. And one is essentially known as the within group fixed defect. The second one is going to be the fixed difference, fast difference fixed defect model. And third one is your LSDB techniques, okay? And now let us look at one by one. Within the transformation fixed defect model, when we looked about within the transformation is essentially we need to average that. I am not again reading all line by line, rather than I'm just focusing about on the equation here. So what we are now doing, if we are rewriting the original equation 1, which we have written, and we are rewriting that in a mean term. That's why within the transformation we are doing within the country, for each country we do the transformation yi bar, and that's going to be alpha I plus again sum of your j varies 1 to k, beta j xij bar, then mu y, then we are fixing the delta t bar, and of course you have the error term. Now once we do this, and how we are going to do that, I have already explained. The within transformation is to average the variables over time for each country, then subtract the end country average from their counterpart in the original equation at all time points, which leads to cancelling out of the individual effect. If we do that, then automatically the individual effects are going to be cancelled. How it's going to cancel? Because we are subtracting equation 4 from your previous equation 3. Then you know previous equation 3 was yit. Now we are writing yit 3 minus 4. So essentially yit minus yi bar. And then similarly your right hand side variables. Now equation 5, the unobserved mu I heterogeneity has really actually disappeared in the equations. And that's why we did within transformation fixed defect to counterattack the problem of heterogeneity bias as well as the OLS inefficiency aspect of the OLS. Second type, which again very easy, is just the first difference equation. Instead of doing the average, we are now looking about the first difference. We are differentiating the equation with respect to time. Then we can rewrite yit. Let's say that's the equation we have written, which was typically the same equation which I have produced in the equation 3. Now in this model, we eliminate the unobserved effect by subtracting the lag period to the current time period. Instead of average, we are now taking a lag of this. So lag of equation 6 is known as the equation 7, where yi instead of t, now we have lag t minus 1. Similarly, alpha I, and we have xi ji t minus 1, mu I, and t and ety 1. You might say, sir, why not alpha I? Because those are individual entities, and those times dimension is already not there. That's why there is no, we're going to have I minus t, or even thinking about mu I minus t. And that's why we have what we call the lag effect with respect to your y as well as your experimental variables, apart from the unobserved specific effect as well as the time dimension is of course there. That's why we have written delta t minus 1. And now similarly, the way we did equation 3 minus 4, now we are doing equation 6 minus 7. And to get that first differential equation, I write delta yit is going to be a function. And in this scenario, in equation 8, the unobserved heterogeneity has again disappeared. However, there are certain problems, despite whether you look about the within transformation model and particularly the fast difference effect model, the intercept and the x variable trait remain fixed for each individual will disappear. But what happens, the error from both the delta yit, which is essentially now going to be some extent correlated for previous observation, thus two error terms have common components. EIT, you can see EIT minus EIT minus 1, then EIT minus 1, EIT 2, and that way these successive error periods are going to be autocorrelated, and which is again going to be another problem even when you try to look at a fast difference model. So in order to tackle both the within transformation model as well as the fast difference model, and then we can again use the third one, which is more popular one, is known as the LSDB techniques. I think some of you who if you have already what you call familiar with the penal data model, you know the LSDB techniques. And this least square dummy variable techniques is typically we are introducing a dummy variable within the model to allow the cross-section entity but stay constant over time, and the effects that is going to specific each time period are again going to be cross-sectional entity. Now we are just trying to keep my equations remain same, but we have only added an additional what you call term in the right hand side equation in the 9. That's you can see sum of I varies 1 to n alpha I ai, and this alpha I ai term represents the fixed effect on the dependent variable for each of those countries. And this we can rewrite again in the matrix equation. Again, I tried my best to reduce the mathematical jargon, keeping the audience in the mind, but at least some of the basic equation which I felt is important for you to understand. Therefore, I have actually I have kept those equations. Now I rewrite that equation in the equation 9, which we have written in the matrix notation. We can write y is equal to d alpha x beta vector. N plus u, and you have the y matrix nt into yn by nt minus 1, sorry, nt by 1, and then you have the d, which is typically the dummies, and it's all going to be off diagonals are going to 0, and you do have only the diagonal elements with having n and tn process. And then you have the x number of variables, and of course we have the alpha as well as the beta. And keeping those things, we set a null hypothesis, all intercept dummies are not same, because we are saying the individual heterogeneity in the model are not similar. And if that is not similar, that is our null hypothesis. That's why we are saying we should focus more on the panel data model, because there are certain heterogeneities there, and those individual heterogeneities are different from one country to other countries, but they're not different from one period to another period within the country. And then we have, of course, you all know the typical way of accepting or rejecting the null hypothesis is to calculate the F values. If the calculated F is going to be greater than the critical F values, then you are going to reject the null, which implies that fixed defect is preferable over the simple pooled ordinary least square methods. Okay, then there are certain, what you called limitations of this fixed defect model. And by the way, when I said fixed defect, I of course did not define what do you mean by the fixed defect. Fixed defect, typically, we are saying there is a model, and the simplest way, if I am going to explain you, that we have a dependent variable, we have, let's say, one independent variable, and we are saying that this independent variable, which we treat as a regressor, and this regressor can really predict the mean value of your dependent variable, which is y. But what I'm saying, apart from this x, apart from the error term, because you already know apart from x there is error, which is typical in the basic econometrics, you all know that white noise or error term is always going to be there. But what I am saying here in the panel data model, apart from that x, and apart from the error term, there is another individual country-specific effect, or that is known as the individual entity, and that individual entity is going to have an impact to predict the mean value of your dependent variable y. And if that is the impact, but we all know that there is the impact, and that impact is observed in nature. That's why we are saying it's going to be fixed impact. How much is going to be the impact? That can be some extent measured, therefore that is fixed. That is already fixed impact is going to have, there is a one country's impact, there will be some fixed impact on that, on the y, predicting the value of y on second country or third country. But whatever this way, that some extent can be controlled and captured within the model, and we can say that is observed in nature, and but it is also fixed in nature. That's why we said it is a fixed effect model. That means there is a effect, and that effect is going to be fixed in nature. And that's the model. In the fixed effect model, we treat that effect as a fixed, okay? Whereas in the random effect model, which I'm going to explain soon, in the random effect, we are saying, yes, apart from your x and error term, there is also another country-specific effect. There could be, if you are taking a two-dimensional equation, so where I'm introducing the time, then we can also have mu I and lambda t. And then those mu and lambda is going to have an impact for predicting your y value, which is your dependent variable. But then how much is going to be the effect? That effect is random in nature. That means that effect actually follows a random distribution, which is like probability density function. Always, in a random variable is always lies between 0 and 1. So we don't know how much, but that is, we know there is effect, but that is nowhere controlled within the hand of the individual entity or whoever is actually trying to capture. So that's why we are saying there is a random effect. There is an effect, but the effect are random in nature because it follows a probability density function with 0 and 1. The variable is actually treated as random. And then apart from that, you have another random variable, which is the error term, which I'm going to discuss soon in the random effect model. Now, as I said, that way when you looked about fixed and random effect model, the limitation of this fixed effect is, again, there is sometimes within the estimators are going to be bit biased, and fixed effect discards a great deal of variation of the explanation, because all variations between the individuals we are treating some extent no variations. And that could be when you try to take the fast difference or even take the within estimators, those effects might be there, but we are really not able to treat those effects. And fixed effects uses n degrees of freedom instead of n minus 1. Maybe because of that also it's going to be one of the other issues. And fixed effects are particularly not going to be efficient because of the standard error. And of course, when you look about the expected value of your xi bi, if that's not correlated, then it is again going to be another limitation. Excuse me. Okay, now going to discuss about the random effect model, which is, I don't want to spend more time because we have already briefly explained about the static panel model, and I talked about the fixed effect. Only in the random effect, as I said, the difference here is in the fixed effect model, we treat the omitted individual specific variable, that's the mu I, are treated as a fixed constant over time. However, as I already explained just now before a 1 minute, that the random effect model mu I is going to be random variable like your error term. Okay, so where mu I is a constant for each individual entity, random effect model can be used subject to two conditions. Okay, one can we use, and one is the first condition, each of the unobserved variable ZP, which is being drawn randomly from the given distributions. And I have already given certain examples. Anyway, I'm going to share the slides with you so you can go ahead. Because of the time constraint, I'm not explaining the examples here. And now directly I'm coming to the model. And now you can see the model looks similar, pretty much similar what we have explained in the fixed effect model. Only, as I said, the mu I and the delta are again random in nature, and those are again some way random. Your EI is going to be random. Therefore, what I did in the equation 3, I have first in equation 11, I have combined those three effects on the right hand side, mu and delta and E. Mu I, delta T, EIT is combined to VIT, and where VIT already you have written is the combination of those three effects. Through three components, why we can combine? Because already three are already random. So when all are random, there is no point of again segregating, because you don't know, because all are random. And that's why we have just rewritten the equations in the from equation 11 to equation 12, and all the parameters in your right hand side equations are random, and it follows a normal distributions. Particularly when you look about the normal distributions, we assume that that's going to be normality in your 13 equations. And second condition, the ZP, which is again variables which are typically related to the heterogeneity, are distributed independently of all the xj variables. If you have, let's say, 5 variables, x1, x2, x4, then we are saying all the x1, x2, and x5 are independently distributed. They are not really correlated. And those control variables j, which is either going to be typically treated from mu or it could be treated from your delta, are again going to be independently distributed. And because of that, we say those two conditions if fulfills, then we are going to look about the random effect. And if this is not happen, then what is going to happen? If there is not independently distributed, then your mu I and EIT will not be uncorrelated. That means they are going to be correlated. If they will be correlated, as a result, if that happens, then the random effect estimation will be again biased and inconsistent. Okay, and again, we don't want to discuss more detail about the proof, but at least whoever actually proved that that's actually happens. Second one, we will again use the fixed effect model in those scenario. If that's happening, random effect estimation, if that's becoming biased as well as inconsistent, then better to use the fixed effect model for the first conditions. And to use that, if it satisfies both the conditions, then definitely we are going to use the random effect model. Okay, this is the fixed and random. Then because of this different characteristics of both the models. Now it is always create sort of dilemma as a researchers for us to choose whether to go for fixed effect or whether to go for random effect, and how we are going to do that when you have a data set on your hand, and how we are going to tackle those scenarios. For that, there have been, again, vast debate and disagreement among the econometricians. But though it is difficult to answer, but at least the Houseman, he has come up with the papers published in 1978, and the seminal paper in Econometrica. According to Houseman, he has come up with a model or specification test to choose, to at least identify whether the random effect is good, or whether to choose the random effect or whether to choose the fixed effect. And he adopted the test based on the idea that under the hypothesis of no correlation, if there is no correlation between your xi, which is the experimental variable, and the error term, then both OLS and GLS, ordinary least square and the generalized least square estimators, are going to be consistent, but OLS is going to be inefficient in nature. Whether these sort of things, the regressors are correlated with the individual effect. If that is the case, if the regressors are correlated with the mu I, and if there is no correlation between these two terms, then what happens? According to Houseman, he has fixed the null hypothesis, which is random effect are consistent and efficient. And if we reject the random null hypothesis, that means we are going to choose the fixed effect. It's natural. And if we are alternate hypothesis, random effects are inconsistent. That means if we are accepting the null hypothesis, typically, then we are going to choose the random effect model. And how? That's why the Housemans, they have tested, and he has created the formula, which is again beta hat fixed effect minus beta hat random effect, again multiplied by to the power variance of your fixed effect beta, then variance of your fixed effect, beta fixed effect, and the random effect, and that is the transpose. And then we do have fixed effect and random effect model, which follows a chi-square distributions with the k degrees of freedoms. And typically this H, if the H value is higher the H value, we reject the null hypothesis. That means we are going to choose the fixed effect, because when you reject means you are saying random effects are now inconsistent and inefficient. That's why I choose the fixed effect model. And lower the H value, lower the Houseman's test, whatever the H value we are going to get by using this formula. If that value is low, then we accept the null hypothesis. That means we are not rejecting our null hypothesis, and then we choose the random effect model. Okay, so far we discussed about the static panel model. Now I'm going to discuss about the dynamic panel data model, but just give me 1 minute. I'll just drink some water and come, okay? Please give me 1 minute. Okay, now we are going to discuss about the second type of model, which is typically the dynamic panel data model. And while we use the static panel data model, that enjoys certain advantages over the use of the time series or cross section, which we have so far discussed from last 1 hour 10 minutes, that we already said that there is the advantages of using the panel data. However, it also complicates the modeling on the other hand, because when you try to take two things together, one the cross-section entity, the other in the time dimension, then that model became more complicated. And as you can see some of the equations, and you will see that as we go for more from static panel to dynamic panel to, let's say, panel simultaneous equations or panel stochastic frontier models, you will see there is much more complications are involved in this techniques. For that reason, when we looked about the dependent variable, for example, when you have a dependent variables follows a simple autoregressive process, AR1 process, this is known as the simplest dynamic model. Okay, so that's what in the beginning I said, when we have a model, and that model is actually treating your lag dependent variable as one of the explanatory variable, then in that scenario, we cannot run a fixed effect model or random effect model. Rather than, because this is the relation between your y and x is already there, apart from your individual specific effect, apart from your time dimension effect, but then now we are adding a one more effect, that is the lag of the dependent variable is now explaining or able to predict the mean of your y. And if the lag of y itself is going to predict, then that became a AR1 sort of process, and then the dynamic nature is involved, and therefore we are saying that is a typically known as the penal dynamic model. And penal, because you already know there is a n and t dimension are combined to each other. And the standard deviation, the standard within transformation estimator with the fixed effect model is going to be biased. If you are having a lag dependent variable as in a model as an explanatory variable, then what is going to happen? Whatever three types of model we discussed within the fixed effect, which is the within transformation and phase difference and LSTP and all, and particularly those are going to be biased. Alternative estimation procedure with specific issue with regard to biasness and efficiency is going to be happen. And how, if you look at the examples, you might think as a researcher, sir, when can one use the fixed effect, when can one use the static panel, and when can one use the dynamic panel? Of course, you already know within the static, when can one use fixed effect, when can one use random effect, that I already told you through the Hussman's specification test, though there are certain controversy and debate is still going on, but at least the Hussman's specification test, Hussman who has come up with some ideas, and then he has provided those ideas about testing the null hypothesis and accepting the null and rejecting the null. But now when we are looking about how to know which model we are going to use, then you have to, only when the answer is here, is you need to run a model. Whether you are running a static or dynamic model, the model should come from your economic theory. It's not that you have a data, we have a data, we want to use the model. Of course, wherever data we have, if we use, because the econometric softwares are available, you can get the results. I am not saying that we cannot run, in technical term, yes, we can use, but run the model. But the issue is, I am talking about the whether to choose what sort of model is should derive from your economic theory rather than just based on empirics. Okay, and I have given few examples of the dynamic panel model. Many economic relations are dynamic in nature. You all know, for example, dynamic model for the gasoline demand in the US countries. Dynamic model, I have particularly used the second one, dynamic model for growth convergence. When there is a convergence in the economic growth, there is a what you call broader notions of convergence, which is the sigma convergence and beta convergence. And neoclassical growth model typically looked about the Barrow and Salai-Martins, or any sort of growth model you look, when those growth models are always going to be treated as not static. It's not that there is always going to have an instantaneous effect in the sense which are going to be contemporary in nature, but there could be also lag effect, and that sort of lag effect is always going to be included in your model. Then we need to use the dynamic models, and dynamic models for farm investment also are always going to be derived based on the economic theory. Okay, I don't want to again explain more detail about the modeling aspect, but you can just look at the first equation where we are just writing a simplest dynamic model. Now, if you look at compared to what we have written in the static model, whether those are fixed or random, but there you cannot see the lag term. But now you can see in this equation, we have written yit is equal to rho yit minus 1 plus, of course, you have the vectors of explanatory variables, and there is a scalar, beta is a scalar related to all your explanatory variables, and omega iit, which is a white noise, which typically the error term. But what is the clear difference? The clear difference is the first term in the right hand side, that is the rho yit minus 1. If I remove xit beta, then you can easily see this is just a AR1 model, autoregressive order 1, because your y is just a function of its own lag and error term. when I'm saying I'm just deleting or removing xi, of course, then you can see this row, the mode of the row is essentially going to be less than 1 to ensure the stationarity, which again I don't want to discuss. I guess the expert who must have taught you about the time series must have explained everything on the time series aspect. Now what we are trying to do, we need to look about this, and then I don't want to again discuss all the equations here, but I would like to summarize the results. What is the result from this, PPT, or at least this slide, is all about that if you have a dynamic nature model where you have introduced a lag dependent variable in your right hand side, then that lag dependent variable error term, now what will happen, yit is a function of your omega, and definitely yit minus 1 is also going to be a function of omega, and therefore there is going to be omega 1 and omega t minus 1, omega t minus 2, or let's say relation between t minus 2, t minus 3, t minus 3, t minus 4, so on and so forth, is going to clearly create a autocorrelation models within the data, and that is some extent leads to unbiasedness. You particularly, even if not unbiasedness, at least the efficiency parameters are going to be affected, and in those scenarios we are actually trying to see how this row is going to be calculated, and then how we are going to look about what is going to happen to the row if it is there is n actually increases as well as t is in increase. And in some way we say Nicholas bias, because the Nickel 1981 has come up with the ideas and proved that the results which is going to be very, very biased when the presence of your lag dependent variable which in your model. Then Andrew Anderson and Hessio, again they have also come up with how we are going to tackle the phase difference transformations, remove both the constant as well as the individual effect. Instead of yit, they are trying to say that we can take the phase difference and run delta yit and row delta yt minus 1. Automatically in those processes, what happens, the individual intercept terms as well as the successive what you call the delta, the error term is nowhere going to affect your model, and because of it is nowhere going to affect. Why it is not affect? Because you have already made the equation into the first difference, and through that we have net out the effect. Okay, once you net out, then you can easily see that the results are going to be no more what you call the inefficient. To solve this problem, those two bias whichever we have discussed, then there are certain problems, even if those are the limited what we call dependent models, but the GMM, which has become more popular, particularly Arnold and Bond and Arnold and Brewer 1995 and 1991, followed by Blundell and Bond in 1998. All these seminal papers, they try to look about running a dynamic model through the phase difference to creating a generalized methods of movement. There are four movements conditions in the statistics, and those are first movement, you all know the mean, second movement is the standard deviation, third movement is the skewness, and fourth movement is the kurtosis. Okay, and those sort of movements have been introduced through this GMM to look about how to restrict those movements by creating the instruments. And typically that's all about the phase difference model, when you have the delta yit, rho delta yt minus 1, and then you have the error term, which is again in the difference term, and I and t always is going to be there, bound to be there, because it's a penal data model. The idea of the phase difference GMM is as follows: although the delta epsilon it is correlated with your delta yt minus 1, but it is not correlated with yit minus 2 or its dependent variable at any more lags. And because of any more lags greater than lag 2, it is no more going to be correlated, because we have already taken the phase difference. And if you try to take the expected value, that means the mean value of your delta error term and the lag of your yit minus j term, then you will see that that's going to be 0. That means they are nowhere correlated. Arnold and Bond argue that the Anderson and Hessio estimator, while consistent, but it fails to take all the potential orthogonality conditions into the account. Okay, so as I said, these are again very much what you called mathematically proved with different lemma and assumptions. But I tried my best to explain what is the problem here and how that's going to be sorted out, and how the bond, Allen and Bond and Allen and Brewers and Bondon and Bond, those papers are actually talked about, and what is the issue. And that's why they have added the instruments, and those instruments are essentially the lag value of your variables which you are running in the right hand side. And then those lag variables can actually some extent help in terms of removing those issue of what actually could not solved by Anderson and Hesiod. So this is again the first difference model, and now the final one is system GMM, which is typically the Blundell and Bond in 1998 showed that the fast difference GMM estimators, again, I don't want to discuss more detail about the mathematical part, but when you look at the fast difference model, in the fast difference model, the rho which we have talked about, and if the rho values is going to be equal to close, at least closer to 1, okay, then what happens in those scenario, your fast difference model may not be again going to produce efficient result. The efficiency property is going to be some extent affected even if there is taken about the fast difference, but still the rho which is going to be create certain problem because of non-stationarity and because it's going to have a random walk. And because of that, what they felt that we need to think about running a system of equations. Okay, the system GMM is nothing but you run your level equation, then you run your fast difference equation. So that's again together you are taking within the system, and that's why it's known as the system GMM. And Blundell and Bond show that the fast difference GMM estimator is purely an autoregressive model that is without additional regressor, has a large finite sample bias and low precision in the two cases. First, when the autoregressive parameters tend to unite, that's what I have already said. One. Second, the variance of the specific effect mu I increases with respect to variance of UIT. If the variance is your error term and the variance of the context specific effects are going to be more of what you call increase, and the variations are going to be much higher, then it is going to be some extent going to what you call disturb the normality conditions, and therefore it is some extent going to disturb on the OLS properties and thereby the results. And in both cases, lag values label and dependent becomes weaker instruments since they are less correlated with the subsequent change. And this is again the equations. That's why they have added the additional instrument. The summary, they took a level equation and fast difference equation together in a system. That's why it's called the system GMM. And they are added certain additional instrument what unknown Bond could not do in the fast difference model. Okay, then finally they have looked about the test, the validity of the models in the dynamic model. Typically we looked about the Sargent test as well as we also looked about the autocorrelation conditions and the second order of autocorrelation and the Sargent. And Sargent test try to follow a null hypothesis over identifying restrictions are valid. Both fast difference and the system GMM accept the H for better result and reject the H1 or not, in the sense that way that if you reject, then we can see that it is some extent not better. Yeah, this is again, I think I have so far explained you both the panel model, the static and dynamic, and this is a results which is anyway you can, I am going to share the slide, you can read and look at how you to interpret, particularly after you estimate a data set by running a panel data model. I haven't taken, again, this is not my own slides, I borrowed from the others, in the sense others mean the seminal econometricians who have actually estimated from the startup journal. I think source is already written there. But my idea of sharing this slide is when you try to estimate a model, fixed effect or random effect or typically any panel model with the results, and then how we are going to interpret those results. And you can see here, if you look about those results, typically one we are saying the model is YIT, then we have beta 1 XIT, Then we have beta 2, let's say x2t, and similarly till we have beta k, xkt. That means there are k explanatory variables, and that we have a panel data, and we have a fixed is specific effect. That's actually what we call the alpha I here. Yes, alpha I. Then you have the error term, and you can run the model. After running the model, this is the result will appear, and now we see how to interpret. Essentially, how are you going to interpret the results? That's why I have tried to bring this table, and you can see the results, particularly the number of observations and all, and then there is a correlation, and of course there is a raw values, and you can easily see how we are going to interpret each of those coefficients. But I am again going to explain that when I run the data. Okay, these are the references, and typically if any of you are really keen and interested to learn more about the panel data and to be an expert in the panel data model, and then you can, at least I strongly recommend the Chang books, because that looks to me actually bit less mathematical jargon. If of some of you are already well versed in mathematics and statistics, definitely any books you can follow. But I am talking about a beginner, and who are, let's say, even if not beginner, but let's say having not depth knowledge in mathematics, then definitely you can look about the Chang book, Analysis of Panel Data. That's a nice book. And as well as Jeffrey Uldridge in 2050, and econometrics analysis of cross section. And of course, there are plethora of what you called papers, which you can easily type the model, you will see in the Google, because that's actually the digital world help us to get all the information through internet, and you can easily find out many articles and many references for your further reading on these topics. And with this, I thank you everyone for listening to me. Now I am exact in time, almost what you call 4:30 now. So remaining 30 minutes, as I already said, I am going to talk about the second part of my lecture, which is giving a demo by showing how to do a panel data regression using a stata econometric software. Then after 15 minutes, it will be open for all of us to discuss. If you have any questions, you can ask me. So without losing the time, now let me go to the second part. So please give me a minute. I will open my folder. Okay. Are you able to see that Stata software now? The dashboard, are you able to see?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So this is the Stata. I don't know how many of you are already know about the Stata, but assuming that you know, given the time, I cannot again discuss more detail about running a data in the Stata. I am assuming you already know. If not, still you just look at how I'm doing. So first, what you do, any sort of panel data, that is very important. Before going to the Stata, opening the Stata econometric software, first step for you to arrange the data in the panel format. That is very, very important. And now you let me open my data set. So you first step for us to arrange our data in a panel format. That is very important. And for you, I have already given the example. If you remember, one of the example I was talking about, the determinants of ICT, the information communication technology. What are the factors that affect the ICT development for the emerging market economy? And this is my data set. And if you look at the first column here, A, so we need to first arrange, because this is not the data, whatever the data you will collect, it will be always in the panel format. Nowhere you will get the data always in the panel format. Of course, there are some who are already published, they showcase their data, that is okay. But when you try to do any sort of data modeling, you need to arrange your data your own way, in the sense you need to look at how you are going to arrange. And you can see here what I did. My first variable is country. I write country. Now you can see that I have first country. Again, I know what is my first country. First country could be Argentina, I guess, because I have taken 27 countries. Now you see, I have arranged first country, then I move to second countries, then third countries. You can see all the data I have arranged, 10, country number 12, 15, and you can see that, I reached up to 27 countries. Okay. My first step, you need to arrange your data in the panel format. And when I said panel format, you remember in the second slide, I was talking about the pooling, two types of pooling. What I did, I pooled all the year together here. You see, pooling over the time, that means I keep my country remain constant. First country, first year data, first country, again second year data, first country, third year data. You can see I have pooled all the data. My data set is from 2000 to 2018. Then I move to second. If you look at the row number 21, let me go up. Are you able to see? I know it's maybe very small, but I hope you can easily see that data period. So now second country, you can see here 2000. Then again second country all the years. Then third country all the years, that way. So once I arrange my two things, which is the I and the T, this is I, the equation. If you remember the equation, we are saying country is I and my year is T. Okay, now my dependent variable, ICT development, how I created, I have created ICT A variable, ICT access, ICT uses, and those data are again I have collected from the World Bank, and then I use a principal component analysis to create an index. I don't want to again discuss more detail about how I create the index, but assume that this ICT index, which is a dependent variable, for example, how I am going to say for Argentina, the ICT development for year 21 is 11.51. That means for 100 people, the ICT development for that country is 11.55. And then next year it is 12.4, and in 2018 for Argentina, ICT development has actually moved to 43.30. Similarly, that's my dependent variable. Then I do have independent variables. One is my per capita income. This is FDI. Again, I arrange FDI of first country, all years, second country. Similar, the way you do for your fixing the I and T. Once you fix and IT, then you know what is your Y1, what is your X1, X2. These are the explanatory variable, Gini coefficient, gross fixed capital formation, ICT export, and all those things. Once I arrange my entire data set in the Excel, then I can easily import this data to the Stata. Okay, so I have already imported that. That's why I have already made a panel, EMEs, panel emerging market economy, which is a DTA file. This DTA file I have transformed from Excel to DTA file by converting the Excel data to Stata data. So because of time constraint, now I'm going to directly import that data, which I have already saved in my folder. Okay, now I will go here, click open. I went to the Stata website, software. Then I click my panel EME, which I have already created by importing the Excel data to a Stata DTA file. Now I click on open. So once I open the data, now first stage, always you check whether your data are actually imported properly or not. I just type BR, enter, browse, essentially short form, which I typed. So now you can see the way I kept in my Excel. You can see now country is already there. I can check whether I have all my 27 countries are imported properly or not. You can see those 27 countries are there. That means there are 27 countries, and the year of data for each country is 2001 to 2018. Okay, so I and T are already imported successfully. Then ICT development, ICT access, ICT use, and all other variables, all the variables which are having in my data set, I have already successfully imported. So once I successfully import that, now what I am going to do, of course, that is very easy for a beginner. You can go to always Stata website. There is a Stata software, websites are there, Stata journal is there, and help is already there. Beginner can easily learn. Even if you don't know, you can easily see here also. It's very familiar, the what you call user friendly, the way you have SPSS or eViews or any, then you can easily click. For example, we are looking panel data, you see here, panel data, fixed effect, random effect model, all those are there. But since I am already some extent familiar and work regularly on the panel data model as well as in econometrics, I can directly type the syntax, because the syntax type will be always easy and it will be very quick. So now let me run the model. And as I said, our objective is to look at what factors affect the ICT development in those emerging market countries. Okay. So first thing is ACT. I set my country data. I have country is my I. Then I have year is my time. I just fix. Now you can see SA panel variable. I converted the data I have imported. Now I created the data to a strongly balanced panel. Starting that, you can see there is a country variables and then is the year variable starting from 2002 and is 2008. So once I do that, now I can go to simply regress, and I am going to regress my dependent variable. First, always your dependent variable. I double click here. This is called the ICT development. Then I have per capita income. Then I have let's say human capital, LNHC. And then I do have foreign direct investment. I do have the financial development. I created the data. Then ICT export and import, export data of goods and services. That is another explanatory variable. And of course, the urban population, urbanization, LNUP. So those are my, what we call the variable. First, I'm running a fixed OLS model. What you call the pooled OLS model. To run the model, I just click enter, nothing. Okay, I just click, you see the results. And now I am going to, because of the time constraint, I don't want to interpret. I'll only interpret the models which I have explained you. So once what you can do, you can immediately store this. Of course, there is a do file and all, which any of you can do, but again, you need to learn those. But for me, what I'll do, I'll just estimates STO store. I am going to store this result because this is a pooled OLS. I enter. So results are already stored here. Once that is done, I'll again no need to type, because already you can see here the commands are already generated. I'll just simply click here. Instead of again typing X, Y, all the variable, I just keep this. And now I am going to run a XI country specific. That's why I write XI regression LNUP. And then what I am going to do, I'll just try to, let's say, I.country, COUNTRY, because I am interested to look at what is happening. You can see here, I'll explain you a little bit. Just give me one moment. I estimate first. Now I have estimated. Estimates again store OLS LSDB technique BUMMY. I stored that. Now again I'll go back here. XI regression. So I country I did. Now I'm going to go for I year. Then in the bracket I can CLUST cluster. Then of course what way I'm going to clustering, I'm going to clustering the country here. Okay, so country. Just a moment, I think, sorry, I did a wrong here. Instead of cluster BC, I have to type the BC, which is the clustering approach. BC is not found. Just estimate and country. Yes, actually, see, this is the problem when you have to give exact commands. I missed the command, that's why it was not coming. Now I try to do that. Now, once I do that, again, I can simply estimate store OLS, let's say time, because I calculated the time. Now, what I can do, I can go for estimates table. I will tabulate all the three results which I have already stored. Now let's say I store what you call first one is OLS, then pooled OLS, then I looked about OLS with LSDB technique, DUMMY, then OLS with the time dummy, then I enter. Now you can see here how the results look like. I am going to show you the results. You can see the first one is simple OLS. That means your alpha and the I and T are not varying. It's actually remains same. That's why typically the way we run a cross section or time series, we looked about the per capita income and all these variables. Then I calculated the LSDB technique, which is the each country specific effect, the heterogeneity aspect. You can see country 2 to country 27, but time series I have not included there. Then third one model, I kept my I remain constant, but T varies. Okay, first, second model I varies, T remains same. Third model, first model, no variation between I and T. That's what I taught you. And second, I said only I varying. Third is only T is varying. Then there is some sort of each year there is certain effect, and those variable effects are already there. And of course, you have the alpha, which is the intercept terms. So once you do that, then next step is how to do a static model, which is typically the fixed effect and random effect model. Again, I don't want to type. I'll just go here. Instead of XI regression, I'll just change here XTREG. And then we have all those. First, I am going to set the dependent variable. Then we do have the independent variables, followed by, after giving a comma, I type fixed effect. Okay. So if you see these results, which one of the slide I was showing you, you can see whatever way I have showing the slide, you can see the results are similar. Now, for example, in this case, you can see per capita income is significant. Human capital, again, positive, significant, because the P values and T values are already there. And this is the covariance between your error term and the explanatory variables, and the individual specific effect is minus 9.96. And then overall results are already here. Overall I have statistics. And then of course you have the sigma U and sigma error term and rho. That means 96% variation of the dependent variable from the mean values is explained by the explanatory variable. That's why the results are very good, because if you look at the R square within group 7.72, between the group 0.66, and overall R square is 0.48, which is very good, particularly keeping panel data in mind. So once I estimate the fixed effect, I can again same way, same formula, estimate store fixed results. Then I'll go here, just instead of fixed, I just change fixed to remove F, add random. So RE is random effect. I again click enter. Again, I can see estimate store instead of fixed results, and now result random array and DOM. Okay, now I stored. Then I am going to apply the Houseman, whether to test which model is good. It's USMAN Houseman fixed, and then I'll write random. Maybe some spelling mistakes. Houseman FIX. Just give me a moment. Did I store fixed? I don't remember. Maybe I didn't store. That's why it's estimate fixed stores is random. Fixed. Random. Oh, random. See, that's why the problem. I have not written random. That's why now I have to type random instead of random. I was man FIXD, fixed, RANDON, because I didn't write random, I wrote random, that's why it's not coming. Red means there is something wrong in your formula. Now you see, when I wrote random, then it came. So how are you going to explain now? You can see there null hypothesis, which we talked about Hausman, and the higher the null hypothesis, you can see H values are 683.44 and is statistically significant. That implies that we are going to reject the null hypothesis, and when you reject the null hypothesis, you accept the result of random fixed defect, and you are not going to accept the result of random effect. So this is again the static model. Then of course you can use similarly, I can go for the dynamic panel. Again, I go back to my original result. Instead of XTREG, I just going to change here, which is XTABON. So instead of, even if suppose you don't know the formula and all, simply what you can do, you can go here statistics. Let me again help you in that way. Go to the model, dynamic panel data model. This is the Arnold and bond estimation, which I was talking about in the theory, which is typically the GMM fast difference model. I click here. You can easily, this formula, if you don't remember the formula, you already know what is your dependent variable. My dependent variable is ICT development. Then I do have other independent variables. And in case those variables are there, let me, yes, LNPC twice and right there, LN human capital, then LN FDI. Let's say I have just 3 variables. Of course, I have many other variables, but some for simplicity, what we are trying to do, I am just only taking 3 variables. And then you have maximum lag dependent one, instrument also you can give, and always go for the compute 2 steps to estimate. So this is the first GMM model. Once you run the model, you can again go for restart, ABOND bond. This is the second order conditions. As you all know that once you run the dynamic model, you see now in the dynamic model, apart from the per capita income, human capital, and for what we call FDI, foreign direct investment, we do have the lag of these variables, and the results you can see there are all the results are in fact significant. Some are positively impacting your dependent variable ICT development, some are negatively affecting, and the overall world statistic also clearly say the overall results looks fine. But you can look at the probability of second order, first order correlation. You can see there is a little bit autocorrelation problem is there within your model. And then once that is there, you can also go for restart, ESTAT surgeon, let's say RGM. See the surgeon's criteria, which looks about calculating the over identifying restrictions. And through this, you can look about the surgeon's criteria is good. It looks because it's rejecting the over identification restrictions. And then you can again try to interpretation of these panel data models are typically what way you actually interpret your OLS, simple OLS, the way you try to interpret. If it is the LN form, you can say 1% change in X variable is affecting your Y variable by this many percentage. And simply the R square and all the results you can easily interpret. And for that also you can look at some of the empirical papers who have been actually used the dynamic panel and all. You can look them and see how they have interpreted. Then you can also follow those. And third one is the dynamic system GMM. Similarly, it's not exactly same. It's going to be only that you have to give for a different commands. For that, you go for the dynamic panel. The second one is on about the system GMM. Again, you can give your first dependent variable here. And I have already created. Let's say this is my dependent variable, and I'm just, because of time constant, I'm just taking, let's say, only one independent variable, per capita income I took. Then it's all the dynamic ledger. That's why lag dependent variable by default will be there, and instruments for each And depending upon how the models are and how better in your theory, you can test these lags. But typically annual data, mostly you can go for 1 lakh. Don't really, unless you are running a quarterly or weekly data, then you can either select through the time series by doing the what you call lag selection criteria and all, AIC, SBC and all, then choose. Or otherwise, you can just go ahead with the lag 1, which is by default for the annual data. And then you can again similarly type EST bond, and then you can again type here. Already it is already there, then I'm just typing. So by based on those results, you can again present, presenting is same. The way you can see again, the results are pretty much significant, and you can see the past of, let's say, the ICT development in these emerging market countries is already 0.86. That means 1% increase in the ICT development in the last year is going to affect the ICT development of this emerging country by 0.86%, 0.86%. And per capita income, some extent, is actually declining, but still the results are not robust because I have only used one variable, but then there are many other variables which you can use. So now I am just going to stop here. Remaining maybe 10 minutes we can use for any sort of doubts and clarification if you have. Yeah, thank you. Do you have any questions? You can ask me.
I request our participants to ask directly to our sir.
Hello? Yeah, Aswani. Okay, if there is no more questions, so I am once again thankful to Professor Bharatapaswan Mahapatra for giving me an opportunity to deliver a lecture. Though the time is short, but I tried my best to tell about the basic of the panel data model. I am hopeful that all the participants must have at least learned little bit basic about the panel data. But I am anyway going to share the slides to all of you. And if you have any doubt further anything, you can always you can write to me, and then I'll try my best to help. Of course, given my time, definitely I'll try to answer your questions or any sort of problem when you are facing, particularly when you try to use this by taking your own research, whether you are using the panel data in the near future and all. So with those, I think again I'm going to conclude by saying thanks to the Asian Business School of Management Universities, as well as particularly to Professor Mahapatra for giving me an opportunity to deliver in this August gathering. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll do that. I'll share your mail ID with the participants. So if they have any question, they can write to you directly, sir. So thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the ASBM